sincerely. And I'm actually extremely excited to be introducing the guests for this session of our conference. So first of all, I have the immense pleasure of introducing Dr. Wasser. He obtained his undergraduate degree in psychology at Wesleyan University and completed medical school at the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. He completed all of his psychiatry training at Yale first with a psychiatry residency program, and then fellowships in both forensics and public psychiatry. He is currently an assistant professor of psychiatry in the department with faculty appointments in both the public psychiatry and law and psychiatry divisions. He is currently serving as interim deputy program director at the Yale Psychiatry Residency Program, and he works clinically and administratively as the chief medical officer of Whiting Forensic Hospital, Connecticut's only state-operated forensic hospital. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Wasser.
Thank you very much.
And now for our second guest, Dr. Buwalda. Dr. Buwalda was educated in Amsterdam at the Academic University Medical Center and became a psychiatrist in 2002. His interest has always been psychiatric administration and leadership, which resulted into his PhD research in the field of psychiatric administration and leadership through the Horvath study, part 1 and 2. High points in his career are the creation of the International Medical Student Exchange Program, IMSEP, between 1989 and 2000. He is the current chief psychiatrist and medical director of a large addiction center in the middle of the Netherlands titled Novatic Kentron, and was former chief psychiatrist and medical director of Victus Addiction Center between 2013 and 2016. Since 2014, he has been involved in research on the use of apps and recently started his research in the field of virtual reality. And he has also gained multiple awards since those years, including the Martin Simons MD Man of Good Conscience Award, as well as the Distinguished Fellow, International Distinguished Fellow of the APA in 2017. And recently he was awarded with the Administrative Psychiatric Award of the APA in 2019. In May 2020, he became the first international president of AAPAL, which stands for the American Association for Psychiatric Administration and Leadership. So Dr. Buwalda is the current president of AAPAL, while Dr. Tobias Lasser is the current president-elect. So soon he'll be the president of AAPAL as well. So I'm actually extremely excited to introduce both of our speakers. I've gotten to know them, and I think we are truly lucky to have them today in our conference. With that being said, I'm extremely excited to hear what they have to say.
Thank you so much, Shaden. Thanks for inviting us. Thanks everybody for being here. So because we have a little bit of a truncated time, we do have a brief slides we wanted to go through just to set the stage and give some groundwork in terms of how you think about leadership at your stage in medical school and moving forward in your careers. I think I will try to move through those a little bit more quickly than I had anticipated to make sure there's as much time as possible for questions and answers, because I think that's probably the most useful. So I'll go ahead and start. Shaden, do I have screen sharing? I do. Okay. So okay, can everybody see the slides in presentation mode? Okay, great. So as Shaden said, today we're going to be talking about leadership in psychiatry, thinking about early opportunities. Dr. Buwalda and I both represent the leadership of the American Association of Psychiatric Administration and Leadership. Also, Dr. Rochelle, who is the incoming president-elect behind me for the organization, was supposed to be here today, but had a last-minute conflict and so won't be able to join. So the hope for today is that as you think about these things, you'll be able to weigh some of the benefits and challenges of assuming leadership roles in psychiatry, that you might be able to identify multiple pathways to different types of leadership roles and how this might benefit you later in your career. We have no conflicts of interest to disclose. So, oftentimes people think about leadership as if it's an innate personality trait that people are born as a good leader or not as a good leader. But it's not really true. Leadership is actually a constellation of skills and capacities that empower one to galvanize a group toward a common goal. It is something that can be learned and enhanced over time. And unfortunately, because in residency programs, there's really, such a need to already pack in so many different kinds of learning, whether it's about schizophrenia, borderline personality disorder, so on and so forth. there isn't enough space for thinking about leadership and administrative aspects of psychiatry, but there are lots of opportunities as you progress through your career. So if you're able to and interested, it's important to think about how you're going to begin to build those skills towards your leadership goals. So as I said, finding the time can be quite challenging. The ACGME, which is the accrediting body in the United States for residency programs, does recognize the importance of this in the systems-based practice milestone area, but it doesn't require residencies or fellowship programs to train people specifically in leadership or administration. But so for those of you who are interested, and I hope you're all here because you have some interest or you're considering an interest in this area, it'll be important for you to take it upon yourselves to explore possible ways to begin to gain these kinds of experiences. And we'll talk a little bit about how you might do that today. So it can be really challenging, particularly early in residency. So for those of you who are either MS3s or MS4s about to sort of soon to be entering residency, it's going to be very hard in your intern year to be able to really do anything that's going to gain significant leadership experience. I would say for all of you medical students, as you think about intern year, you should really be thinking about survive in advance. Just get through the year. It's sort of like the NCAA tournament for those of you who are basketball fans. You just want to make it through the other side whole. And then as you get to your PG2 years and beyond, you can start to think about how can I gain these skills and experiences to work toward being a leader. So one way to begin to think about this once you get a little bit later into residency is committee work. So many of you are probably already involved in various committees at your medical school, but committee work is a wonderful opportunity to begin to hone your leadership skills because it gives you a particular area or topic area where you can develop a niche and interest and sort of a portfolio of work that you've done, but it's also an opportunity to bring together a group of people toward a common cause. You can plan and run meetings, organize events, fundraise, and ultimately, hopefully, assume a leadership role within the committee itself. So all of those are beginning steps towards understanding what it is to be a leader. The next opportunity is many residencies, though not all, have some form of internalized government. This might be what's called a Residency Association. It may be a union. It may be akin to student government. But the idea is that in these organizations, their residents select their peers who are going to be leaders of the group. And again, it's the same concept that this is going to give you an opportunity to be a representative for your peers. You can advocate on behalf of your peer group. You can organize meetings and events. You may have a budget that you work with that helps you learn some financial skills. And then you can work collaboratively with the administration of your residency program to both develop and implement initiatives designed to address areas of concern. For those who are interested, the American Psychiatric Association also has opportunities for you to gain some leadership skills. So at the local level, you can certainly get involved with your local district branch. Depending on the size of the state where you live, there may be one district branch for the state for smaller states. For larger states, they tend to have county district branches. So in California, for example, there are a number of district branches, but there often are opportunities for you to represent either the organization, your specific district branch as a resident fellow member, or potentially to go to the APA assembly, which is the APA's form of governance. And you can represent your region as a resident fellow member representative for the region. And that's a great way to understand how large organized medicine and organized psychiatry organizations enact policies and all those sorts of things. And again, you'll make wonderful connections and learn about how big institutions make the world run. And then at a national level, the APA also offers a number of fellowship opportunities that are available for medical students, for residents rather, that are worth thinking about in medical school, and to sort of look at the list of what's available and see what might be a good fit for you. So they have a leadership fellowship, which is incumbent in the name, specifically focused on thinking about different kinds of leadership. They have a diversity leadership fellowship, specifically focused on enhancing and increasing access for individuals from minoritized backgrounds. They have the Gene Spock Congressional Fellowship for those who are really interested in public policy and government. And then they have a Public Psychiatry Fellowship who are interested in leadership and administration in the public sector. In the American Journal of Psychiatry Residence Journal, which comes out at least quarterly, they have a section that highlights opportunities for awards and other sorts of leadership chances that you might be interested in. And then finally, in residency, there are many opportunities to become a chief resident, and people have probably heard of this before. So chief residents typically are identified as being in a leadership role, and they serve as a conduit between the administration of the program and the residents. They're sort of the classic middleman in terms of trying to balance the needs of both. But they're often responsible for call schedules, meeting regularly with the program administration, serving as a liaison, designing and implementing, I said already, the call schedule, and serving as a go-to resource for residents when they have questions or concerns. For those who aren't interested in being kind of the quote, the chief resident, oftentimes as a PGY4, there are also opportunities to be the chief for a specific subspecialty area. So you might be the chief resident for your outpatient clinic, or the chief resident for inpatient services, the chief resident for diversity issues. So there are all sorts of different specialized chief opportunities in psychiatry residency programs, and those serve as additional opportunities to hone your skills in a particular topic area. As you think beyond residency, another opportunity to gain some leadership skill are public psychiatry fellowships. So these are non-accredited fellowship experiences, and there are a number of them across the country where you get to learn about specifically administration and leadership in public sector psychiatry, so working for the underserved. And as I said, they provide training in psychiatric leadership, recovery-oriented advocacy, program evaluation, and mental health services research. So it's made up of a combination of didactic, clinical, and research opportunities, and they can be 1 or 2 year post-residency fellowships. Some fellowships actually allow you to complete the fellowship during your PGY4 year because they're not accredited. So it's a nice opportunity to gain that early experience, or to gain that experience a little bit earlier and not have to stay on for an extra year after training. And if you're interested in those, I'd advocate that you go to the AACP website, which is the American Association for Community Psychiatry, and they have a nice website that outlines all of the different fellowships and their differences. A final opportunity to think about is whether to get an advanced degree. So many individuals choose to get an advanced degree either during medical school or while they're in residency or shortly after completion of residency. And there are a number of master's degrees that you can get that people are probably familiar with based on your particular interest. There's an MBA, an MPH, a Master's of Healthcare Administration, which is MHA, or there's a specific, what's called a Master's of Medical Management, a triple M, which is essentially like an MBA specifically for physicians interested in healthcare administration. So as I said, this outlines a little bit the differences. The MBA focuses more on business and finances, the MPH more on research and policy analysis. The MHA tends to focus more on hospital management, and the triple M, as I said, is essentially an MBA for physicians. If you're thinking about, well, I might want to do a public psychiatry fellowship, or I might want to get an advanced degree, what are some of the advantages or disadvantages of each? The public psychiatry fellowship advantages are because it's a training year, you're being paid, you get to take on attending role without having the full responsibilities, and you can kind of test out a system or a role to see if it might be a good fit for you without having to fully commit. But the skills that you'll obtain are a little less clear. You don't get to put the fancy 3 extra letters after your name for the rest of your life like you would with an advanced degree. So those are probably the drawbacks. On the advanced degree side, the advantages are the skills you learn are very clear, they're concrete. It can translate to certain kinds of job opportunities if you really be in healthcare management, for example, in the future. The greatest disadvantage is the cost, because they tend to be quite costly. So you either have to save up, sometimes employers will help pay for these as you go, but you're going to need to think through how you're going to compensate that. And if you have a large amount of medical school debt, which many of us do, it's hard to imagine adding on to that degree of debt by taking on yet another degree. Well, functioning may be more likely to take a chance on a younger individual.
Oh, Dr. Wasser, I'm very
Did I
sorry.
freeze
Would you mind? Yeah, you froze for a second right after you were done with the last slide. Would you be okay with going over the content of the slide again?
What if I said no? What would you do, Jaden?
I would say that is perfectly fine.
No, I'm just joking. I'm just joking. Of course. So what I'd say is, as you think about your early career choices, There are a couple of sort of nuggets for thought. So one is to consider taking advantage of opportunities. So oftentimes systems that are struggling are more likely to give opportunities to people earlier in their career. So on the one hand, you're taking a risk by going into a system that's struggling, but on the other hand, you're going to get an opportunity to kind of get your feet wet doing some leadership experience in a real hands-on way that you might have to wait many more years to obtain that opportunity if you want to go to a more secure system where things are more well operated. At the same time, it may be very frustrating to work in a system where things aren't functioning well, so you have to kind of balance that out. The similar idea with the idea of, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? I think it's a different way of saying what I just said. Whatever roles you take on, having ongoing supervision is really important. I know early in my career, I maintained an off-site supervisor. I would meet with once an hour for 1 hour monthly, just to be able to bounce off ideas and think through the things I was going through with somebody who wasn't directly in my line of supervision in my hospital. And then, of course, geographic considerations, and that has an impact both on your quality of life and your finances and all of these things. So in conclusion, there's a really growing importance on the need for leadership in psychiatry. Opportunities are hard to come by early, so you have to be specific and try to build those skills and opportunities. And after you're done with residency, there are a number of different opportunities, if you choose to enhance those leadership skills. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for any questions, which certainly can be about the slides, but really should just be open to anybody and everybody. And I think Dr. Bawalda and I will kind of do our best between the two of us, either to decide who ought to answer at all, or first, or both, or however we can help.
So while we wait for some questions, I just wanted to plug AAPAL for a second there. It's also a wonderful place to learn more about leadership. And just so you know, membership is completely free for medical students and residents. So for current M1s, M2s, and M3s, you're fine. And also for M4s, you're fine as well. So I've put the website, and then you could sign up for a membership on the website as well. Another thing is, I'm going to put Ms. Bell's email. Ms. Bell is wonderful and will help also answer some questions that you may have about some logistics in terms of the membership, if you had any. Just wanted to plug that out there while we're brainstorming some questions for our panel.
Dr. Watson, my name is Srija. I have a question. So I'm wondering, when we are considering like leadership opportunities, right? There's obviously going to be sort of cost balance with perhaps more focus on our clinical skills development or some other sort of volunteering thing. So how would you say, like, how to decide on that balance? Or should we say, okay, just choose something that's important to us and focus with that, or try to balance everything out?
Do you want to take a shot first, Dr. Bawalda, and then I can respond?
Yeah, okay, I will try to start. Thank you so much to Wise and also Shaden for organizing this great meeting. Well, it's always difficult to get this balance. It is about structure and concentration, and it's also a lot of people have also partners, so you have to also be aware of what your partner wants. In the Dutch and also in the United States, it's an equal society, so that means that men and women have equal opportunities. And if you are very straightforward and you are good oriented what you want to do, and you can balance it out with your partner, then I think that it will be a great opportunity. And I will have one quote of one good, very great mentor of me. That's Dr. Lloyd Setter. He was the highest chief medical officer in mental health office of New York State. And he said, you have to read a lot, and not just in your work area. Learn to write. Start with emails with calls for clarity and brevity. Learn how to speak in meetings and public settings. Also find mentors. Also, Tobias mentioned it. Mentors you admire and want to emulate. Stay with good bosses, because bad bosses are not good for your energy and are going to get you out of balance. And good work environments as long as possible, but not forever. You also say, remember that job satisfaction is usually less about money and more about mission, desirable colleagues, a learning work environment, an ability to exercise your talents, quality of life, and pride in achieving results. But not only that, be a change agent and innovator. If you have gotten this balance, you have to look further on and you say, okay, change jobs. And the last one is the biggest one. Try not to have your work totally dominate your work, as he did, and I probably do too. So that's, if you have this, bear this in mind, you are pretty outbalanced, I guess. Wise.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the question, Srija. So I think all I would add is, you're right. Anytime you're gonna, all of our energy and time is limited, right? So if we make a choice to focus on one thing, there's an opportunity cost potentially to focus that time and energy somewhere else. I think early on, you want to make sure first and foremost that you feel very comfortable that you are a good clinician. If you don't feel that you have a solid grounding in your clinical skills, or if you were to ever get feedback along the way of your training that you didn't, there was some area that would benefit from shoring up, you really want to make sure that you've got that addressed, because when you end up in a leadership role overseeing others, if you don't have basic competencies in the areas that you're supervising them in, it's going to be really hard to lead them and provide feedback. At the same time, I would say that if your interest is in being a wonderful clinician, there's of course nothing wrong with that. And that is a really important thing to do. And we need people to take care of patients. But for those of us who have an interest in leadership, there aren't enough of us. And so if you have that interest, you have that proclivity, I would really advocate that you take the time and you devote whatever little time you can in your professional life to try to begin to build that repertoire and begin to focus in those areas, whether it's a committee or a particular topic, an organization, a fund you want to put together, because it will, by sort of trying it out in that small way, it will give you a taste of what it's like, and you'll better understand whether it's something you're interested in and passionate about, or whether it isn't a good match for you. So I think that would be that's how I would respond to the question.
Thank you, Dr. Buwalda and Dr. Wasser.
Hello, everyone. I had a quick question. Thank you so much, Dr. Buwalda and Wasser, for the super informative session. And going off of the previous question that was just asked, I was wondering if both of you have any tips or suggestions for how to prevent burnout within this realm of leadership within psychiatry. So I've been reading a lot about people leaving academic medicine or leadership roles because of the burnout or overwhelming weight of the different things that they're doing. So I'm wondering how we can prevent that for people interested in leadership.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So maybe I'll take a stab at it first, Victor, and then if you want to add anything.
Go ahead.
Sure. So first of all, I think, we're seeing burnout across the board in medicine and psychiatry. So I think that is pervasive, unfortunately. And so in some ways, part of what I'll say is probably applicable whatever area of medicine or psychiatry you end up finding yourself in, but I'll try to tailor a little bit more specifically to thinking about leadership. So I think in leadership, leadership is challenging, and part of the challenge is that you're often doing a couple of things simultaneously. So sometimes you become the holding environment for people's hopes, dreams, and their frustrations. So when things are going well, they put a lot of stock in you and what you can accomplish. And when they feel things are not going well, you can often become sort of the focus of why people believe things are not going well. It's very difficult to manage that. And I think at the same time, you often are in a position of recognizing the limitations of you in your role, and that you have to kind of help people understand what is possible and what isn't possible. And that can be very difficult. I know personally for myself, I find that very challenging at times. And I would say, in addition, that it can be a little lonely sometimes for that reason. And so one of the things I'd really advocate for is developing a network of individuals who you think that you can collaborate with, commiserate with, and just sort of share those challenges. So, one of the things we talked about, mentorship, which is really important, and that can help with that to some extent. Another thing that I found really helpful in my career is to have a community of peers who are going through similar kinds of experiences that you can share with. So whether that's an organization like AAPAL or it's within an academic medical center, it's a department, people that you went through residency with who shared your interest and went into different aspects of leadership. Those communities are so important because you need a place to debrief, you need a place to breathe, and you need a place to be able to complain about the things you're struggling with every day to get you through. I would certainly also say to Dr. Bawalda's point from before, I think you have to let your work be your work. And for those of us who are passionate, like many of you are, I'm sure it's very easy to let it become all consuming or to let it keep you up at night and all these things. And I think the earlier you can try to identify what are the aspects of your life that are important to you outside of work and make sure that you carve out time for those, even if you feel that in the short term it's sacrificing something about your work, it really provides you many more long-term gains. And so I think you have to feel empowered to do that. I think the last thing that I just want to acknowledge, particularly as we are two white men talking about this, is that there are challenges that are also particularly difficult for women and individuals of color that are different that I can't speak to in a lived experience kind of way, but I want to acknowledge how the ways in which minoritized individuals come across struggles that are different because of the ways that they are experienced in the world or people treat them in the world. And so to try to overcome that, I don't want to pretend that it's easy or that I could express how difficult it is because I haven't had to live it. I think for all those reasons, it's extremely important that individuals who come from those backgrounds continue to strive and fight and assume leadership roles, because we need your voices at the table. And sometimes you have to claim your voice at that table, and that's a difficult challenge, but it's so important to have individuals like yourselves there sitting with us, making sure we understand what we're not seeing because of the lived experience we don't have. And for the people I know who have been successful when they come from underrepresented backgrounds to get a seat at the table to stay there, I say similarly to find a community of like-minded individuals who you feel you can talk with, share with, those who both come from similar kinds of underrepresented backgrounds, but also individuals from the majority who are kind of in the fight with you, allies who want to understand better and want to be better. So I'll stop there because I feel like I'm sort of going on and on, but those are some of my initial ideas. Anything you want to add, Victor?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tobias, because it's important what you say. And that's why I'm so glad that there is a lot of a diverse group of people joining our lectures, our presentation. So that's a good thing. And also together with Alta Stewart is one of my favorite mentors in the APA. She is a diverse psychiatrist, and she will have an interesting leadership presentation at the APA at the New Orleans at the 24th of May. So you can join us all. But I think something which is also about diversity, but is you have to listen to yourself, your own body, your personal interest and energy level. So for myself, it was always important: how much can I do? How much energy do I have? And when will I be exhausted? And if I'm exhausted, what are the criteria of exhaustion? I'm irritated, I'm annoying, I'm not the gentle guy I always wanted to be. So if you put that in perspective, and you know when you will become exhausted, so you can prevent yourself becoming exhausted to get enough sleep, get enough sports and workouts so that you have enough energy, go outside, listen to the birds, how beautiful they sing without computers and so on. And so learn about yourself and your spouse, and also the peer group. I think what Tobias also mentioned is the peer group is so important. I have a peer group who already exists for 25 years. And I think that's quite a rarity, because we talk about these peer groups and we want to have it. And you know that even when it's sometimes lonely, you always have your peer group to ask some advice. Am I doing the right thing? Can you help me out? Can we evaluate? Can you help me out to this difficult situation? And then you are feeling more comfortable and more strong to go over these difficult situations. So that's what I wanted to add.
Thank you both so much. That was super helpful.
Yeah.
Hi there. My name is Eliza Hoffman. I'm a first-year medical student at Chicago Medical School at Rosalind Franklin. And I have a question that's maybe a little more personal. I mean, if we want to be psychiatrists, you know. So I guess my question is really about that experience of doubt I think that I have a sense in myself that I could be a good leader, that I have certain qualities that I think bring myself to leadership. I really appreciated in your presentation how you talked about how leadership is something to be developed. But I think that sometimes, actually, I will say that as a leader, one of the things I want to do is help folks who don't have that feeling, that maybe that little spark, that they feel like they could be a leader. And so do you have any words of advice, things to suggest that might help develop the confidence that comes with being a leader?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. So first, it's, as you sort of alluded to, there's people have these kind of ideas of what a phenotypic leader is, someone who's outgoing and gregarious and charismatic and carries the room. And that's a certain kind of leadership, but that's not the only kind of leadership. There's quiet leadership, there's leadership by example, there's all sorts of different ways of being a leader. And I think one of the most important things about being a leader, whatever your personality style is, if you ever, go to a leadership training or you hear about them, one of the things they often do is they have all of these standardized personality inventories that they'll have you take. And, while I don't know that I think they're all like the greatest thing ever, they have their, advantages and disadvantages, different ones. I think the reason that they all focus on that is because one of the most important aspects of being a leader, just like one of the most important aspects of being a good psychiatrist, is knowing yourself. I think you need to know what are your particular strengths and what are your particular vulnerabilities, and how do you build on your strengths and have an awareness of your vulnerabilities in a way that you can either make up for them, you can at least have an awareness of them so that you can not like kind of let yourself fall into them. For example, you tend to be someone who's a little bit more quiet or reserved. You have to have an awareness of that to make sure you do have a presence in the room. And I think the final piece is because one of the other aspects of leadership is that's really important, just like being a psychiatrist, is that, and that's why psychiatrists make such good leaders, because self-awareness is such an important part of the work of both, is that not everyone's going to experience the world the way that you experience the world. And some of that has to do with the aspects of diversity we spoke about, but some of that is just personality characteristics. And so, I know for myself, one of the things I've learned over time, just as an example, is that I don't like conflict, and nobody likes conflict, but I often, when I need to assert myself, for years, I really worried that I was going over the top and, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. And how would people experience that? And do they think I'm aggressive or I'm this? And I look around the room and actually nobody was concerned at all about the thing I had just said. But in my mind, I had taken a really big step and kind of perhaps overstepped. And it took me a long time of thinking through those kinds of things. So to your question about how do you bring other people along, I think a really important aspect of leadership is creating the space for other people to feel that their voice can be heard and that you're going to listen to them. So, I mean, in concrete ways, if you're in a meeting or you're in a space with others, to try to not to call people out in a way that makes them feel uncomfortable, but to make sure that you're double and triple checking. Is there anyone else who wants to say anything here? Have we captured all the ideas that there are to talk about today? Is there anything we haven't covered that anyone thinks would be really important for us to talk about before we conclude? And you just invite them to have the space. And sometimes it's also about the meeting that happens before the meeting. So sometimes if I know that I'm going to have a large meeting with a bunch of people about some particular topic, and I know that there are key stakeholders who I want to make sure their voice is heard, but I'm not sure they're going to be as willing to speak up, I'll make a point of talking to them beforehand, say, hey, we've got that thing tomorrow at 3:00. I really want to talk about blank. I think you're really great when it comes to blank. Would you be willing to talk about that? Or is there anything you want to tell me to make sure I can convey or I can make you feel comfortable, any of those things. So that pre-work and that relationship building stuff will really help in trying to invite people along with you. And they'll really, I think often I found people appreciate having the invitation to participate.
Thank you for that very thoughtful answer, Dr. Wasser. So I actually got a question in the chat and someone wanted me to ask it anonymously. They were just wondering how do people approach saying no sometimes when a leadership opportunity arises? However, they feel like they're overwhelmed with other opportunities, and how to mitigate prioritizing which leadership position to say yes to.
Victor, you want to take a first crack and then I can go for it?
Yeah, and then you can crack it after me. That's a good thing. Well, there are a lot of opportunities, and you have to tell yourself what is you have to prioritize what you really want to do. You can be a chief in research or a manager or what. There are so many opportunities that you have to choose. So make a priority list and say this is the most important opportunity, and that's what I gain for. Also, focus is important. They always tell to me, "Oh, Victor, you're doing so many things. Where is your focus?" Because it's so difficult to, and there are so many challenges that I want to do. It's very difficult. But virtual reality for me is my focus. So that means you have to find out a way which is my focus and go for it. Tobias, you can crack it after me.
Yeah. So I want to say two things that may sound like they're contradictory, but I'll speak to both. And I want to first acknowledge that I think I'm probably in some ways not the best person to speak to about saying no to things, because like Victor, I'm often finding myself overcommitted. But one of the things I learned from one of my mentors early on, and certainly from personal experience, is I think unless you're sure something is not right for you or is going to really be way more than you can take on, I often advocate that people early in their careers say yes to as many things as they're able to, for a couple of reasons. One, saying yes allows you to gain new experiences you won't otherwise have the chance to try out. And I think what often makes people feel anxious about saying yes to something, it just like the question entails, I'm so overcommitted, I'm doing all these things, how could I possibly add one more thing? I've often found in my career that whatever the time commitment somebody says something is going to take, it's often not as bad as they make it out to be. And so I usually can take things on and try them out. And that's the other piece I'd really advocate for people is usually with these kinds of opportunities, again, unless it's something really dire, life or death kind of situation, which is rare in psychiatry, not that it's never, I would conceptualize it as trying it out rather than making a commitment. So very rarely is there something that you say I'm going to do, and then if you do it for 1 to 6 months, whatever it is, and you say, you know what, this isn't for me, it's way more than I thought I could take on, it's not what I thought it was going to be, I don't like working with these people, there's usually a very little penalty for saying, you know what, this isn't for me anymore, I'm sorry, I need to step away from this. So I think people often feel hesitant to say yes because they're afraid of being overcommitted. But I would remind you or sort of advocate that you think about it differently, which is that you'll try, and you can even be explicit about that with somebody. Say, you know what, I'm a little anxious about this for A, B, and C reason, but I'm willing to try. Could we try it for 3 months and see how it goes? And if it's not working, could I let you know that I'm not sure it's right for me? Usually people will say yes, because if they're asking you, they're eager to have you involved. Every once in a while, they, I really need a year-long commitment or whatever the thing may be. But that's rare. And even if they say that's what they need, again, I've often found there's usually no penalty. There's no real penalty. There's the fear of some perceived penalty, whether it's social or professional, but usually it doesn't matter. And I've actually never been more relieved than when I tried something, found it wasn't right for me, and then I mustered the courage to send the email or make the phone call and say, I don't really want to do this anymore. And they say, okay, thanks for letting me know. And yeah, you're right, you purge. And I feel extremely relieved and glad to have moved on. So, but also glad that I tried it, because then you don't have the fear of lost opportunity.
Thank you so much for that. And I think there's a question in the chat as well that was just directed to me. Sorry, I didn't have time to pre-read it to summarize it, so I'm just gonna have to read it. How minoritized individuals can find a place in leadership and work with allies in a traditionally white male-dominated space? How do we navigate the fear of coming across as aggressive or other stereotypes for advocating for ourselves in these roles? And how do allies work on avoiding or challenging their biases? Thank you for this wonderful question, by the way.
I think this is a cracker for you, Tobias.
I will certainly try. And again, I want to acknowledge that, I'm not able to speak to this from a place of lived experience, but I certainly can talk about some wonderful role models I've seen of individuals who come from diverse backgrounds, and also how I, as someone who tries to conceptualize myself as an ally to people from diverse backgrounds, try to be aware of and work toward these things. So the first thing I would say is that I recognize that there is a fear, particularly for women and individuals of color, particularly women of color, of come across as you're describing in this, what might be described as assertive for one person could be described as aggressive or perceived or misperceived. And I think the first thing I would say is that while those concerns, of course, they exist, and I understand that they are real, I think you have to be true to yourself, and you have to find a way to try to be true to your voice. And I would try to seek out individuals who you think are going to be more receptive and try to bring them on as allies. So if you're concerned going into a white male dominated space that you're not sure how you will be heard, I would look for other leaders of color. I would look for women of color, or I would look for white males who seem to be approachable, open, receptive, and say, look, I'm really interested in blank, or I'm really concerned about blank, or I'm interested in blank, but concerned that if I espouse for this or advocate for this, that it's gonna come across in a way. How do you think I might best approach this? Or I was thinking about approaching it in this way. What do you think? And I would try to bring others with you, or use supervisors or mentors to try to practice these ideas. I think that it's really difficult. And I think at the end of the day, there's risk involved. And I don't want to pretend that, I want to first say there shouldn't be risk. It shouldn't be a risk to be yourself, espouse the ideas that you believe in, and advocate for the things you feel strongly about. It should not be a risk, but I also feel that I would be being dismissive of your concerns if I didn't acknowledge that it is a real risk, and that in order for all of us to move forward as a culture, as a society, as institutions of medicine, we need brave people to be willing to come forward and take a risk, and hope that over time, those of us who have the privilege of being from white dominated backgrounds will learn and will understand that we need to change the way we perceive the world. To that end, I would say that as someone who every day tries to be more aware and tries to be an ally, but recognizes that I have implicit biases or things I'm not consciously aware of, so much of my personal work has been, one, having the great fortune to work with individuals from diverse backgrounds who haven't been afraid to speak their mind, and I've learned from them both publicly and in private conversations about their experiences. And I think the second, for those who do come from more dominant backgrounds, is to continue to try to understand that the way that we perceive the world, that others don't come to the table with the same, they don't get to take the same things for granted. And so I've had to learn, for example, when I'm in a space, whether in a virtual space like this or a physical space, over years, I've learned to look around the room and count how many female faces are there in this room? How many faces are there in this room who have come from a more diverse background than I do? And how is that going to influence the discussion or the experience we're having here? If I say something, how might that be perceived by them differently than, or if somebody else says something, how might they be experiencing that differently than the way I experience it? And then a lot of times I try to debrief with people afterwards, particularly if it was a difficult meeting, and say, or a difficult discussion, what was that like for you? How did that come across to you? Was there anything I could have done better that would have made you feel more safe in your role? So I don't want to pretend like any of this is easy. It's not easy, and it's sad and unfortunate that that's where our world is. But I think in order to move forward, we have to be willing to have difficult discussions. And so I don't have a simple answer that avoids the difficulty of it, because it is difficult.
Yeah, but there is still a need for more leaders, also in minority groups, and we need more diverse leaders. So I think the fight and the battle you just taught us about, Tobias, is on today, and we have to do that together with all of us. And I think this white male and so on world will decrease and diminish, and so that diversity at the end will prevail.
So So I know we have around 70 seconds left. There was one more question in the chat. That being said, is it okay if we discuss it, or would
Yeah,
it be
no,
okay
it's
to
sorry.
share?
Yeah, we can, I can have a few minutes of wiggle room. It's not absolute at 4 o'clock.
So last question. So people were wondering about the pros and cons of being a chief resident, and they wanted some clarification about whether it's a position that people get appointed to, or do they have to apply?
So I'll start with the pragmatic question about appointed versus apply. So it's different at every residency program, and it kind of evolves over time. So I know, so I'm a part of the Yale institution. And so for many years, it's always been an application process, or I should say it's a nomination process where your peers nominate you and then you decide whether or not to accept the nomination. And then there's a competitive interview process. And for many years, it was a process that was done where essentially the program leadership just picked the people after the interviews. This year, there was more of a collaborative process where all the slate of candidates was made publicly available to the residents, and then they were given the opportunity to weigh in anonymously about the strengths or drawbacks of different candidates, and that feedback went to the residency leadership, who then ultimately still made the selections, but it was allowed for more of a participatory feedback process. But every program is different. Some programs are very small, and so there's only you're picking 1 or 2 people out of only 4 or 5 residents to be the chief resident. So sometimes it's just appointed in that way. And sometimes it's a popular vote by the residents. So it's very different in every program. So as you consider residency programs, it's something you could certainly ask about. And as you look at different programs, particularly when you start interviewing, you will almost definitely meet with chief residents from that program. And it would be a totally natural question to say, how were you selected for your role? To the larger question of the benefits and the drawbacks, I think the benefits, some of which I espoused in the presentation, are really learning what it's like to be a leader, being a representative voice for the residents. And I think probably more than anything, getting to learn what happens behind the scenes in the leadership of a residency program. And I think those are some really valuable discussions and opportunities that you get in that role. And it'll give you a taste for leadership to see if this is something you want to continue with in your career. I think one of the real drawbacks is, because it's a wonderful opportunity to learn about leadership, you start to learn firsthand about what I would describe as sort of role identity confusion amongst your peers, which is that people will confuse you as the person. So me, Tobias Wasser, as a person versus me, Tobias Wasser, in the role of chief resident. So if one of my peers comes to me and says, I'd really like to have the week of blank to blank for vacation, can you please make sure I have that? And then you work on the schedule, and for whatever reason, the rules of the program, the way the schedule falls, whatever, you can't give them that request, they may understandably be frustrated, and they may then say, hey, Tobias Wasser, you're mean. Why do you do that to me? You don't like me. And
Tell me.
Yeah. And so they may have a hard time distinguishing that you as an individual would love to be able to give them what they're interested in, but you in your role have to work within certain parameters and guidelines, and you can't ultimately do that. And that experience gets played out over and over again in that role. And it's hard because you are still a resident, you're still a peer with these individuals, but you're elevated into a role that is different, and it can impact your friendships and things of that nature. So hopefully people will be able to understand that, but there are certainly there are instances where people don't understand that, and it can impact the way that you have to interact with that person. Anything you want to add? Sorry, go ahead, Chetan.
Oh no, I was going to say bonus point for whoever can name that coping mechanism, but it was just a joke.
Yeah.
All right, unfortunately, we are at time, and I know that everyone is scheduled for another session. Once more, I just want to thank Dr. Wasser and Dr. Bualda for this wonderful conversation that we usually don't normally have access to as medical students. And it's great to learn about leadership at this point. And again, whenever you get the chance, please feel free to check out the AAPAL website and consider joining in. Again, it's free for us. So we hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and thank you.
And it was a pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for having us.
Thank you.